Hi there. Welcome to Get Lit. My name's Pete Crooks. I'm an editor at Diablo Magazine. Get Lit is a program that interviews local authors about their latest books and their interest in using public libraries. Today we're here with Lee Foster, a Berkeley resident and a very successful travel writer and photographer. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you.
How are you?
Great. Pleasure to be here.
So you live in Berkeley, but grew up outside of Northern California. Can you tell us a little bit about where you came from and how you came to the East Bay?
Yes, I will. I grew up in Minnesota, a small town in Minnesota, and then I went to Notre Dame as an undergraduate and decided to come out to Stanford to do graduate work in literature and to teach the young as a college professor. So that was my goal, and by the time I got to the end of the literary program at Stanford, I really wanted to do my own books rather than have a life of doing books about books. So I kind of began to do my own books. I had a novel published and a memoir of Minnesota published at that point. Then for reasons of romance, I moved to Berkeley. So that brings us to about 1970, and I've been in Berkeley ever since and really enjoy our Bay Area.
What were your impressions of Berkeley growing up in Minnesota and coming there in 1970? That was a pretty interesting time.
It was a very stressful time.
Yeah.
And the world I grew up in Minnesota was a much quieter Eisenhower-ish era in the 1950s. And the world of Stanford and Berkeley in the 60s was a very stressful time with the whole Vietnam situation and so forth. So,
and did you always have an interest in travel? You've been really to most points on the globe now, professionally to document as a photographer and to write about it. What inspired that enthusiasm for travel?
Well, I think it's a curiosity I have about nature and culture and wanting to get out and explore the world and come back and be of some service to people and defining the experience. And so early on, getting out to take a look at the planet and coming back and defining it in various ways, maybe an article, maybe photography, maybe a book, and maybe on a website. That seemed to be the pattern that I got into. And it animates me, it keeps carrying me forward, and I don't anticipate it changing.
I'm curious about the first published article or book. If you can reflect on that, what that was like for you, what the content was, and that kind of creative satisfaction of bringing something out for people to read.
Well, really, my first book was called Making the Most of the Peninsula. It was a travel book about the peninsula. The experience of doing that book was quite interesting to me in several ways. Again, the year was about 1980, and it gave me the sense of a territory that could be mine. I mean, I could commit to studying the Silicon Valley and publishing a book, as I did with Presidio Press. And it was also a kind of interesting time of technology breakthroughs. And I had figured out how the publisher could get the book all laid out from my computer disks. And I also had figured out how CompuServe could publish the book online for me, and I could have a new stream of royalty and a new way to contact people or to communicate with people with the book. So I think that comparable to your Grand Canyon experience, probably that first book, Making the Most of the Peninsula, with a company called Presidio Press, was the launch point where I knew that this is what I would do.
And you were publishing online in 1980?
Yeah, it was actually about 1982. I did an agreement with CompuServe, and I'm kind of in the record as the first travel journalist to earn $1 in the online world.
That's fascinating.
And at that point, you may recall the systems were very slow. like 300 baud. The words would come across your screen. And CompuServe had a plan where you could buy their premium service. In other words, you could get certain content, which you paid a huge amount for, but people were interested. And so I got a 10% royalty of the premium content. I made a proposal to them that I'd put all my travel writing on. I put my Yellowstone article on, one of my first Yellowstone pieces, for example. I began putting my articles on, and I put a lot from that book on. So that kind of propelled me in one direction that I've taken in travel journalism, which was the high-tech direction. So I've always been interested in magazines and books and newspapers, but I've always also been interested in the other side. And the irony is that the book was called Making the Most of the Silicon Valley, making the most of the peninsula, which happened to be the emerging high-tech area.
Sure, certainly. And catching up to speed, 28 years into the future, from 1982 in 2010, you're launching apps for the iPhone, as well as publishing bound copies of your travel books. Can you talk a little bit about the app that you just launched for the San Francisco book?
Yes. My two most recent books are called the travel photo guides to San Francisco and Washington, D.C. And I have them also reinvented, shall we say, as apps in the Apple iTunes App Store. And there's a fascinating interplay between the whole concept of a book and the concept of an app. For one thing, books will never sell outside of North America. I mean, you cannot do a travel book about San Francisco and sell it. I mean, I get a few sales from my publisher that are so-called international sales, but those are to Canada. But the app, for example, my San Francisco app, which has been a bestseller in the App Store, has sold in 46 different countries.
Wow.
So you can imagine that as a traveler. I mean, I, for example, could be here and get an app about China. If I was going to Beijing, it'd be very difficult for me to get a book about China written in China by a China author. But I could get an app. So there's that whole worldwide audience. And it's quite a dramatic change in the whole publishing of literature and also these more practical books of service. The audience is worldwide. The consumer is paying a very small amount of money generally for an app. Apps sell for like $1.99 or $2.99. That's what the market has dictated. And books will sell for maybe $14.95. And the app is also a whole different kind of travel experience. For example, the book, my book, The Photographer's Guide to San Francisco, is limited to the 75 photos in the book and the 96 pages in the book. The app has 500 photos in it. So you can get a lot of depth visually that you couldn't get in a printed book. Similarly, it has certain functionality like maps. You can go to things on a map. You can see where you are and where you want to go and what's around you in an app in a way that's quite different than a book. So there are a lot of aspects of apps that are new and intriguing for the consumer.
And it's much easier to update content for an app than it is for the edition of the book that's already been published.
Absolutely. This is a very big factor, especially in travel. As you know, we live in a volatile world, and the people who are in the business of producing apps are tremendously encouraging to their authors to do updates. Because apps also come out of a computer software world, and as you know, the latest update in your software is felt to be better. So the authors are encouraged to update their apps, and it's so easy to just change things, whether providing more insight or providing better data. You can change it, and then you can hit the button and the publisher will do a new release. They call them new releases of the apps. So I re-release things about once a month.